right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Field Service Live. Glad you could join us. I'm James Leichter, your host. If you're not aware of who we are a channel dedicated to helping the field service industry in any way we can. We have guests on occasionally. We talk about various management and operational topics, financial matters, anything we can do to help the field service industry. Anytime during tonight's show, your questions, comments are welcome. And we hope that you'll share the channel with anyone you know that's running a field service or a contracting business of any kind. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on management meetings, how to have good meetings. Now, please, before you disconnect me, I know some of you were getting ready to click that button, Colin, and get rid of us because they heard meetings. And they didn't want to hear about meetings because a lot of us, including myself, we thought meetings were where managers went to look important and justify their salaries, and nothing ever gets done in a meeting. And, that might be true for some companies. Some companies might have terrible meetings, but all companies should have meetings. All companies.
Well, if I can jump in there. So I was telling my wife when I went and grabbed some food about what I learned last week about making sure that if somebody gets brought up and you say, hang on, let's go get them in the meeting, how brilliant that is. Because there's no way you can not listen to the show and learn something of quality every single time.
That's easy for you to say.
Well, that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm just a 43-year-old guy, entrepreneur, but I think there's always like a significant piece to learn on every show. There may be some stuff you're like, yeah, but there's always a value take that you get.
I think so. I think that's Colin, by the way, our engineer. He has a face for radio, so you won't ever see him. You'll just hear his voice. You know what, Colin? We should recap last week's episode a little bit and cover some of those things very quickly.
Yeah.
So one thing Colin was talking about is that when you're having a meeting with somebody, maybe it's a one-on-one meeting, it could be a meeting between you and a staff, but when you have somebody bring up another person, so they have something important to say, and it's involving another person, it involves Beth or John or Ed, you need to stop the meeting and go get that person. If you can't get that person, then don't talk about the person. Schedule another meeting. Because you should never have a meeting about what someone else supposedly said or did if you weren't there and witnessed it yourself. So don't let people bring up somebody else's actions if it's an important part of the meeting without that person being there. Otherwise, you're wasting your time and you'll end up having the meeting all over again. Now, why do we even have meetings? Well, think about this. If you're a sports fan, maybe you like baseball or football. What NFL football coach does not have meetings? All of them have meetings. All of them. They'd be crazy not to have meetings. They know meetings are essential to having a great football team or any other team or organization. It's just that many meetings aren't properly done. So let me first cover what I think an owner or a senior level manager, which is sometimes both, let me talk about what I think are the minimum 4 things that any owner should be doing daily. Number 1, gather information. You're always gathering info. You're asking good questions. And by the way, that's a whole nother skill set that's worth a whole show on, is how to ask questions. You're gathering information. You're imparting or giving information, which includes training. Number 3, you are nudging your subordinates along, motivating them, getting them to do the things that you want them to do. And finally, you're making decisions. You gathered info, gave info, you've been nudging your people, use all that to make good decisions. At a minimum, those are the 4 things that an owner is doing with their company. But if you're an owner, you're working hard to get out of daily management. You want to get out of that daily grind, don't you? You want to be unnecessary. Nice to have around, but not needed. And I tell my coworkers, that's my goal. My goal is to be unnecessary. Nice to have around. In what way? Well, he's getting old. He's wise. He knows things we don't know, but we certainly don't need him here. If he's here, it's nice to have him here. He can fix broken stuff and figure stuff out and help us make decisions, but we don't need him. That's your objective. If that's going to happen, then you have to get people to do what you're doing at least 85% as well as you do it. Now, maybe you're self-employed, you own the place or you run the place because you're pretty skilled, and there's certain things you're probably very good at, and maybe no one will be as good as you are at something, but many people can do your job as effectively, at least at 85%, as you can. And some people will be able to do some of the things you do just as well. So your goal is to train them and get them to the point where you become unnecessary. What better way to do that than in meetings? Meetings are the most efficient way that you can leverage your limited management time. And right, I mean, that's a finite resource is time. We only have so much of it. But remember, really successful people, NFL head coaches, baseball managers that have made it to the World Series, mega rich people, billionaires, people that made their billions, didn't inherit it, they have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to work with. That's what you and I have in common with them. And that always bothered me. I mean, it really bothered me because I realized I can make all the excuses in the world about why I didn't get to a certain point in my life, but I can never excuse away the fact that all those successful people that beat me, that kicked my butt, had 7 days a week to work with, 24 hours in each day, just like me. So we have to get the most out of that time. There are two types of meetings you might remember from last week's show. If you haven't seen last week's show, you might want to go back and watch it. There are process-oriented meetings, and there are mission-oriented meetings. And last week, we focused on process-oriented meetings. There's actually three subtypes of a process-oriented meeting. There's the one-on-one, there is the staff meeting or the department meeting. It might be your staff or it could be the whole department. And then there are operational reviews. That would be typically when a department joins your department for a meeting to maybe demonstrate something, explain something, gather information, get ideas, things like that. The one-on-one meeting, they are the most common, and they can include performance reviews. The staff meetings are a little less frequent, but they should be done on a consistent basis. Depending on your company, you should have full staff meetings every week, and you should have one-on-one meetings on a regular basis with lots of people. The one-on-one meetings, the frequency depends on your employee, your subordinates' level of technical understanding. As they mature in their position, and I don't mean that they've been there a while, I mean they are really getting it. They understand their job. You'll go from, say, 2 meetings a week to maybe one meeting a week to maybe one meeting every 2 weeks. But I wouldn't go any longer than 2 weeks because people need to hear from you and they need to impart information and you need to give information. Remember, no matter how good you get at being unnecessary, you still have 2 jobs left, 2 things that only you can do as the owner of the company. And that is impart company values. Hopefully your company has core values. They're on the wall somewhere. If done properly, core values are very personal to us owners. We don't get them from the internet. We write them ourselves. We give them a lot of thought. Once we write them down, if they're real, they probably never change. And if they do, they change very little. It's your job to impart the company values, which helps build the culture. And the second thing is motivating your people. Those are your 2 jobs, no matter how good you get at being unnecessary. All right, so with that recap done, why don't we talk about the second type of meeting that we didn't get to last week, and that is the mission-oriented meeting. A mission-oriented meeting is ad hoc. You just call the meeting when they're needed. How often do you have these meetings? Well, You may not have one of these meetings for months. Then again, you could do these weekly. This type of meeting is specifically designed to solve problems and or make big decisions. So let's say you have a big problem hiring, and we all do, right? But I mean, you have a big problem hiring. You got big jobs coming that you'll have to forfeit, or you'll have to hire people, or you'll have to forfeit the job, or maybe you're outgrowing your building and you're thinking about buying another building. You're not sure if you want to build new, buy existing. Do you want to lease? Do you want to add on to your current building? Get a whole new building, a bigger one? How are you going to pay for it? Big decisions. Maybe you want to get into the plumbing or electrical business. You do HVAC and you're thinking about getting into another profit center. Big decisions are mission-oriented meetings, and don't make these decisions on your own. Even if you're the boss and no one can tell you what to do, you'll benefit by getting everybody's opinion, gathering information, getting an opinion, processing it. You'll benefit from that, and ultimately you'll make a better decision. So that is done in a meeting. Now, a mission-oriented meeting can be one-on-one. It could just be you and me, and we're there to solve a problem. And remember, I said earlier, if this problem is someone else, that someone else should be here if we're going to talk about what they did or didn't do, supposedly, when you weren't around, okay? So it could be one-on-one. But oftentimes, it's with a staff, it's with senior management, it's with key personnel, the mission-oriented meeting is. And again, it's to solve a problem. If it is with more than one person, if it's like a staff of senior management, you always have to have a chairperson run the meeting. Always. Now, you, the owner, could be the chairperson, but not necessarily. And in fact, I wouldn't recommend the job because it's just more work for you. You're still the boss. You can still be in there being the boss, calling the shots. No one can tell you what to do kind of stuff. But we have to have a chairperson who runs the meeting and calls the shots. That is critical because this meeting has to be organized. It has to be organized and it has to be done well. So, you know what? Let me back up. I was going to give you some tips on how to run a good meeting, but I think that I want to mention this first. These are big mistakes people make in meetings. Mistake number one, be really careful who can order a meeting. In your company, you should have some kind of rule book, a policy manual that sets out the rules. Somewhere in that rule book, talk about meetings. Only certain people should be able to call the meeting. Why? Because they cost money, a lot of money. If you have a meeting with 5 people, if 5 people are having a meeting, and maybe it's outside and it's not an official meeting, but they're meeting about something outside, 5 people, it's costing you the salaries of those 5 people plus overhead, plus lost opportunity. So when people just call meetings and start having meetings, number one, they may not have the authority to do anything about what they're talking about. So really, it's just a bitching session. But those are expensive. It's everybody's salary, and you could think of what it costs you per minute for those 5 people, but don't forget about overhead. Don't forget about lost opportunity. If they're doing that, then they're not doing something else. Number 2, who can attend meetings is very important. When you have a meeting, the people that attend that meeting should only be the people that need to be there, the so-called stakeholders. So you don't want, if you're having a meeting to solve a problem, you would not want somebody in that meeting that couldn't contribute to the problem-solving process. There are certain people that may not have anything to do with the problem, but they have some unique skill, some wisdom that you admire, that you've recognized. You might want to bring them into the meeting. It could be your aunt or your uncle or something like that. I had a wise aunt. I asked her about lots of things. Even though she knew nothing about what I was doing, she brought her wisdom into play, and it was very helpful. So keep people out that can't contribute to the meeting. Bring people in, even if they know nothing about the problem, who could offer a unique skill set or other asset that you could use. So control who can order meetings, limit who can attend meetings. that makes meetings more efficient and less expensive. Let's talk about how to have a problem-solving meeting. And that, again, is what these meetings are all about, this type of meeting, a mission-oriented meeting as opposed to a process-oriented meeting. Rule number 1, don't try to solve too many problems. You can only solve one problem, maybe 2, maybe 3 if they're easy. But quite often, you really can only solve one problem. So if your company has 3 big problems that need to be addressed right away, then you probably want to have 3 different meetings. You could try to solve all 3 in one meeting, but you'll probably recognize we're not going to get to the other 2. Let's just focus on one. Now that you are focusing on one problem, you have to clearly define it, describe the problem. What is the problem exactly? Be careful not to describe symptoms of the problem. That's mistake number 2. Most meetings involve a discussion about the symptom of a problem and not the actual problem itself. So you really have to peel back the layers of that onion, if you will, to get to the real problem. Most of the time, the focus is on symptoms. When you fix symptoms, you still have a problem. Even if you're successful at fixing the symptoms, you still have the problem. So really, really work hard to identify what the problem is, give it a description, give it a name, give it a description, and be sure everybody understands it before the meeting continues. Number 3, you have to have an environment where everybody feels 100% comfortable speaking their mind. You need open, honest, direct, frank communication. I should be able to say anything to you. I'm not talking about allowing people to be impolite, rude. No, not at all. All of us should show professionalism, and professionalism includes manners. But what I'm talking about is I can say to you whatever I'm thinking. I can tell you that I think you are responsibility for A and B. You never did C. I need to know that no matter what I say, there will be no retribution. I will not lose my job. I will not be demoted. I will not be hated. I will not be treated differently. I have to know that I can say anything in this meeting. Now, that is easier said than done. For some of you, it's going to take a lot of work to get to the point where your subordinates, your employees, feel comfortable telling you like it is. Many of us own our own business. Let's be honest about this. Many of us own our own business because we got tired of putting up with people telling us what to do. We didn't like to be criticized. We wanted to be the boss. So we own our own business now, and we're determined no one's going to be our boss. Well, as you get older, you get over that. You realize, you know what? I traded one boss for like 1,000 of them. And if enough of those 1,000 bosses called customers fire me, I'm out of a job. I'm out of a business. I'm bankrupt. So you'll get over that eventually. But if you still have that issue, it's going to be really difficult for you to let them tell it like it is. And if that's your environment, you're not going to have a good problem-solving meeting because you're not going to get people to tell you the truth. Now, I think if you're a history buff or you watch the news, maybe you've seen examples of dictatorships who don't have people telling them like it is. You have world leaders, leaders of countries, not to mention big companies, who surround themselves with people that never irritate them, never tell them anything's wrong, always tell them what they want to hear, and you see what happens to them, don't you? It isn't good. You don't want that environment in your company. You want people who tell it like it is. Again, professional people, but people that tell it like it is. Now, once you have, Colin,
does that come from like so when you're saying that, does that mean that needs to kind of be pushed in like the core values of the company?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, I don't want to put you on the spot, But my day job, right? Do you remember one of the core values that pertains to this very thing?
Well, speak honest and frank, but there's one other piece to it.
Open, honest, frank
and
communication.
yeah.
Yeah. And the reason why that's a core value is because I absolutely want people telling it like it is, because that's the only way to get to the truth. It's the only way to solve problems.
Well, when Susan phone interviewed me, she told me that, and to me, for my personality, that was very attractive.
Yeah.
And I think some companies don't play that way, but I think more and more people are starting to say, push the BS aside and let's just be real and honest.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, I think we do. We just, all of us Americans just need to tell it like it is, be open, honest. And that can only happen, though, when the person on the other end of that appreciates it, says, you know what, thank you. Hey, I get my feelings hurt. If you've ever worked with me, you'll see it. Sometimes people hurt my feelings. I don't mind admitting that. A lot of times, well, pretty much the only time my feelings are hurt is when they're right. Like when I've screwed something up, I've made a mistake, especially if I've made it more than once. It hurts to hear it, but I got to get over it, because if I don't get over it, I'm just going to make the same mistake over and over again. So even if you let your feelings get hurt, that's fine. That's fine. Tell people, sometimes I get my feelings hurt when I'm criticized, but don't you worry about it. You let them know, because most of us, if we pretend like our feelings aren't getting hurt, then we're either not passionate about our work or we're lying, because I just don't think that many people don't have feelings that get hurt. All right, so once you have that open, honest atmosphere and people feel like they can say anything, now your job is to get them to talk. This is where the art of questioning is very handy. You need to ask open-ended questions. Say, really, tell me more about that. Can you give me an example? What more can you tell me about that? Does anyone else have an opinion on that? What do you think would happen if we did that but didn't do the other thing he was talking about? What do you think? You have to get everybody talking. If you see anyone in the room that's quiet, that person needs to be brought out of their shell, call them by name, get them involved in the discussion. If that's how they are in these meetings, though, you don't want them in the meeting. No offense to them, but they're just not really capable of helping with this meeting. But some people are quiet because they're thinking a lot about what's going on. That's fine, but you have to get them talking. You have to invite them into the conversation. So what do we have here? Let me paint the picture. We have a meeting going on where there's a chairperson making sure that we start on time, end on time, that we follow the rules, and there's a few other things at the end I'm going to mention. We have someone like you, someone like me, defining the problem, articulating the problem, giving it a name and a description, making sure we're not talking about symptoms, and then getting everybody in the room to talk, to say anything and everything that's on their mind. At some point, when you begin to hear people repeating themselves, then you know it's time to stop the discussion. So let me say that again. Let me repeat myself. When people start saying the same thing during the meeting, then you've reached a good point. You've reached a point where we're out of ideas. And now somebody needs to start proposing solutions. They've thrown all these things out. We've talked a lot about it. We're repeating ourselves. Now, what are some potential solutions? Kick the solutions around, and the senior person and the chairperson need to sort through those ideas and find one or two solutions to try. Now, this is important for the chairperson to be involved. The chairperson writes down the plan. They write down who is supposed to do what, when. They write down any resources, assets, things that the person's going to need. We're going to need to buy a new computer. We're going to have to get a new vehicle. We're going to have to borrow money. We're going to have to get an appraisal, whatever. But the chairperson, this is where they kick in, and this is why I said if you're the boss, you don't want to be that person. They need to write down the whole plan, all the details. Now, once it's over, we have to think, are there any other stakeholders or are there any other people that need to be notified about our plan? And the chances are, yes, there's people you're going to need to email or call or whatever to tell them what you're doing. So there'll be other people, most likely, that need to be communicated with. The chairperson needs to write that down and decide who's going to do that communication. And that chairperson needs to follow up with everybody to make sure that the plan is being implemented. At some point, it's time to have another meeting to discuss how the plan is going and see if any adjustments need to be made. Typically, that's the meeting where we tackle issue number 2 or issue number 3. So we'd have another mission-oriented meeting, and we'd start the meeting out by saying, hey, last time we were here, we talked about buying a new building or leasing or fixing the one we had. As you all know, we came up with a plan. How's it going? And we readjust if we need to. And then we begin to do the same process over again with another problem.
Can you include some information on follow-up?
Yeah, so follow-up is the chairperson would decide how many days go by before there's follow-up and what kind of follow-up would need to be done. They would decide if it's going to be a meeting or a phone call or an email sent or maybe all of that. But the chairperson, before the meeting is finished, the chairperson needs to write down exactly how we're going to follow up. How are we going to know that we're doing what we need to do? The trick, though, really is everybody needs to take good notes and know where they stand. So with that in mind, let me share with you my employee organizer, this piece of paper. Now, if you're just listening to this, you can't see it, but I'm holding it up to a camera, and it's hard to see anyway. It is a 2-sided piece of paper. I do print it in color, which I usually try not to waste resources, but I want this in color because it's a real important part of my organizational system. At the very top of this piece of paper, I have room for 5 priorities. 5 priorities for my day. So when I get to work tomorrow, I have 5 priorities that I may or may not get done that day. And then down here, I have all the other things that I need to do. I have room to write down the priorities at high, medium, low, the date that I entered it, the due date, and a very brief description of what it is. Because I typically just need a very brief description because I know what needs to be done. I just need a reminder of it. I come into my office and I work from my list. If it's not on my list, I work very hard to avoid doing it. If somebody wants me to do something, I know if I say yes, I'm saying no to something else on my list. So I'm very careful about saying, I'll do that for you and write it down. I don't want to do anything for you. I want to have meetings and have you do everything for me, right? Because I want to focus on bigger things that I'm more particularly skilled and talented at than all these other things that I might say yes to. I work off my list. That's the key. If it's not on the list, I don't do it. If I need to do it, I write it on the list. Now, on the back, I have a very important aspect of this. On the back, I have a list of things that I've asked other people to do and that I need to follow up. So these are things that I have delegated. You came to me, you told me about something, and I said, would you email them? And you said, sure, I'll do it. And I might write it down. If it's important, I'll write it down that you were supposed to send them a report or send them an email or call them. That way, the next time I meet with you, and I try to meet with you in a batch way, scheduled meetings, next time I meet with you, I'm going to say, did you send that email? Did you call that person? Did you finish that report? Did you pay that bill? These are the things I've delegated. Now, finally, down here, I have the things that I think need a mission-oriented meeting or things that I think need to be brought up in a meeting. So all week long, when I hear about something and I think, I gotta tell Colin about this, I got to ask Colin about it, rather than go interrupt him, and this is the key to this, Colin, rather than run down and bother you every time I think of something, I write it down if it can wait, and then next time I see you, I might ask you 5 questions. That's really important. That's what meetings are for, and that's why they improve your efficiency. Rather than bother everybody constantly with things that can wait, write it down and bring it to the meeting. And that way you can take care of all of those things in a more efficient manner.
Well, so I personally like working like that. I consider myself task-oriented, where I like to write down the notes from the meeting and then execute. What if you have somebody who doesn't work in that manner?
Well, if they are really effective not using systems like this, then I wouldn't change them. But chances are, and I work with people like this, they'll tell you they don't need any of this, but they have trouble remembering things. They have trouble making it to meetings. They have trouble doing things on time. They make commitments and don't keep them. And I'm not going to let someone like that tell me I don't need any of this. Those are the people that need this worse than anybody.
So it's fair to say this should be mandatory?
Yes, it should be mandatory. At the bottom of this second page, by the way, I have a short little rule book here. So these are the rules of organization right down there. That way I know how to use the form, and I can give the form to other people, and they instantly know how to use it. A few tips here for your meetings, and then we'll wrap this up. Start and stop on time. When a meeting is supposed to start at 8, it should start at 8. At 8 o'clock, close the door. Everybody that comes to the meeting needs to be there a few minutes early. They need to be in their seats and ready to participate at 8, not walking in at 8. That's not on time. It is really important to attack problems and not people. When you have meetings, do not make it personal. Always attack the problems, not the people. The people can solve problems. Sometimes people create problems. I sure do. But we are also the ones that can solve them. So don't get personal. Even if you disagree with a decision, it's critical that you support the decision. So if you're part of a team, a football team or a business team, you may not always think that we should throw the ball, run with the ball. You may not always agree with the coach's decision, but you have to support the decision. You have to try hard, even if you don't think we should run, kick, or punt. You still have to try your best. True in business. 2 more. Someone needs to take good notes. They have to write down everything that was discussed, all the decisions that were made, all the action items. Again, that's the chairperson. And finally, and this is a good one, do not let employees leave a meeting only to have their own little side meeting somewhere else about the same thing we were talking about. When the meeting's over, it is over. Do not let people go out to the smoking area or the water cooler or whatever and have their own little meeting. I should have said this, and I almost started telling him this other thing. Do not allow that. You go break up those little side meetings and tell them that they should bring that up in the meeting, and you'll give them a chance to bring it up in some other meeting, but they're not going to have their own little meeting. That gets back to my advice. Be careful who can call a meeting.
You know what? Maybe the next show should be how to stop work gossip and,
oh man,
you know, the shit starters.
We'd have to get a real expert in here for that. My thing is I just get angry about it, and I tell people, I say things maybe I shouldn't say, Colin, but yeah, I can't stand gossip, because to me, everything is a problem to be solved. I love problem solving, and gossiping to me is just like a giant waste of time and does nothing for solving problems. If you're a gossiper, by the way, hey, no offense, but quit it. Quit being a gossiper. Be a problem solver. Be an action-oriented person. Nobody needs to have a gossiper in their business, somebody that just loves telling secrets and gossiping about things. Be a problem solver. Be a person that comes to work and they're there to solve problems, and gossiping isn't going to do it. All right, Colin, you got a final word for us?
How do you know that you're hiring a gossiper? Is there any way to tell?
Boy, that's tough. I think that a good show would be on how to give a great interview, really. We should get Susan in for that. But I think that during an interview, you're asking open-ended questions, not yes or no's, and you're trying to get a feel for their personality. Like, what kind of person are they? And it may be possible to get a good idea if they are a gossiper. I mean, one thing's for sure, if they come to an interview and gossip, well, then you know you're dealing with a gossiper. But on the other hand, if they're careful to say, look, I don't want to gossip and I don't want to talk bad about this person, so I'm not going to tell you their name. But here's what I learned when they did that. Something to that effect would tell you probably they are not a gossiper. But I think that one thing about interviewing is you've got, an hour and a half at the most, maybe twice, to figure out whether or not you want to work with this person for years. You can only do so good at that. I think the key is everybody, everybody's on a 60-day trial period, because that's when you figure people out, the first 60 days, 90 at the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I've often wondered why those people get to stay around at jobs, because they cause more harm than they do good, it seems like. But, again, that's my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember, everybody's on their best behavior the first couple of months. So if you're having problems with someone the first couple of months, chances are you're not going to be able to fix them. All right. Well, that wraps it up for this episode, part 2 of meetings. I hope that you have gotten something from it. If you have, do me a favor, and it is a big favor. If you can hit the subscribe button, and maybe you've already subscribed, so hit the little bell notification. Do both. Hit the thumbs up. All of those things, here's why they help. All of those things tell Google that we are not a waste of time. And it helps our rankings when people search for like field service management, consulting, something like that. It helps our rankings, and it gets us out there even further. So that would be very helpful to us. That wraps it up. Again, this is Field Service Live, all about the field service and contracting industry. I'm your host, James Leichter. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope I see some of you in person eventually. Thank you.